Hello, in this video, we'll analyze the Oxford-Martin working paper, Why is Productivity Slowing Down? There's been a slowdown of productivity in the post-2005 period relative to the receding decade for the 5 advanced economies shown in the table. We will draw upon economic models and economic data to evidence the factors contributing to this slowdown, including allocative efficiency, technology, capital deepening, and the composition of the labor force.
To understand the cause of the slowdown, we can use the sources of growth decomposition of labour productivity. This states that changes in aggregate output occur either because of an increase in the quantity of inputs being used or because of an increase in the efficiency of inputs. And this can be linked to Solo's residual model, which separates increases in labour productivity into a change in the labour composition and capital per worker and a residual, which is TFP. This provides the basis for modern growth accounting. The factors contributing towards changes in raw output can be given by the following equation shown on the slide. Using this method of growth accounting, we can see that the causes of the slowdown are similar across countries. It can be seen that overall, changes in labour composition are less significant, and this is because it's a much slower process, so there's only modest evidence of it occurring in the UK and in Germany. From the OECD's productivity database, it's evident that changes in TFP and capital deepening are the main causes of slower growth. This varies across countries. However, on the whole, growth accounting shows that the slowdown in labour productivity can be attributed to changes in TFP and capital deepening, as opposed to labour composition.
One question addressed in the paper that I find to be particularly interesting is that regarding the relationship between misallocation and productivity slowdown. Bakui and Fari have derived the following markup-corrected version of the Solo residual. The equation below decomposes aggregate productivity growth into an allocative efficiency component and another representing pure technological change. But what does this model actually imply? The table shown behind sets out US growth data, comprising also 3 estimates of firm-level markups. Whilst there is considerable variation amongst individual figures, the average of these estimates attributes over a 40% share of TFP growth slowdown to allocative efficiency between 1997 and 2014. So why may misallocation arise? And more importantly, could this be mitigated? There are several potential causes, including licensing or entry restrictions, underinvestment in public R&D or infrastructure, externalities, or even discrimination across economic sectors such as housing, education, or the labour market itself. There does, however, exist an intuitive solution. It's first key to understand the driving forces behind allocative efficiency, which we will take to be the magnitude and heterogeneity of markups. Significant productivity differences persist across industries, even those that produce relatively homogeneous goods. Hence, reallocating resources from firms of lower to higher productivity could facilitate productivity gains and hence economic growth. There is admittedly some debate over the certainty of these results, particularly since the model's framework assumes markups to be exogenous and have constant returns to scale. What is, however, clear is that efficient resource allocation is a more integral factor in growth than perhaps previously recognised. But even more important is the role of technology.
Technology plays a crucial role in productivity. Even further, according to the Romer model, sustained economic growth occurs because of new ideas. Indeed, his model implies that productivity growth is driven by a constant allocation of resources to an idea-producing sector. Considering this, one may ask what aspect of technology prevents this sustained growth. The article provides a few potential sources of decline. Firstly, the level of investment in research and development. Nowadays, even if the former has not decreased, most of investments are directed towards industry with decreasing returns, meaning that more resources are needed from the same amount of outcome. One example would be health industry. This phenomenon is illustrated in the Solo model, where the accumulation of capital has decreasing returns. But in the Romer model, ideas are not subject to decreasing returns, and long-term growth depends on labor. This brings us to a second potential source of decline, the fact that nowadays a steady state of productivity requires more researchers, as we can see it with these formulas. Finally, the notion of creative destruction also slows down the diffusion of any invention, as it could make whole industry obsolete. Now, Eva will tell you about capital deepening.
I will be discussing the impact of dynamics of capital inputs in the market and the role they play in explaining the slowdown of labour productivity. Now, capital deepening is the increasing amount of capital or the decreasing labour that increases the marginal product of labour. and the data has indicated that this has slowed down over time. When capital deepening is high, capital is less of a limitation on the amount of output that the labour can work with. And using the solo model, the TFP is an exogenized factor, meaning that the changes in capital would not directly influence the productivity under this model. But with the Roma model, the productivity is endogenized, which gives a better idea of how slowed capital deepening affects productivity. The article categorizes the effects of slowing capital deepening and investment into two, cyclical and structural. The cyclical effects are attributed to during the financial crisis, while structural are pre-crash. This seems to be quite a generalization on the article's part. However, for simplicity, it does make factors easier to group together. Both are given an equal 50% significance in the overall slowdown of investment and capital deepening. The cyclical is attributed to three key effects: increased financial friction, depressed aggregate demand, and government investment falling. The friction has been deemed a cyclical phenomenon, but it was indicated to have occurred from before the crash. Hence, the 50-50 split between cyclical and structural is somewhat misleading. But as a standalone effect, this friction seems to indicate an imperfect market, since the returns on safe assets have decreased in the US. Applying this to the intertemporal graph consumption, this would infer a kinked budget line, meaning Ricardian equivalence no longer holds, and hence spending decisions of the government were impacted. Looking at the decline in government investment, it seems fairly intuitive that the government fell into crisis mode and was no longer able to spend its money on investment. However, this certainly cannot be attributed entirely to pre-crash phenomenon. The structural effects, however, include a shift to intangibles, offshoring, changes in corporate governance, weakening competition, and short-termism. Essentially, the shift to intangibles has meant that there is an increased difficulty in measuring the level of capital, as well as a decline in incentives for people to create more capital, as intangibles or ideas in the Roma models are non-rivalrous. This reinforces the importance of property rights such as patents, since they allow for monopolist control over intangibles, which incentivizes people to innovate. Overall, the slowdown in capital deepening is said to play a significant role in productivity slowdown. Georgie will look at the composition of the labour market now.
Another reason for this recent slowdown of productivity is the role played by labour markets and the composition of the labour force. This can be seen by considering four factors which affect labour markets: education and skills, demographic factors, leisure technology, and labour market institutions. However, as shown by the table, labour composition has had a relatively small contribution to productivity slowdown, ranging from -10% to 22%. To see why this is the case, we chose to analyze education and skills as well as leisure technology in more detail. A very important relationship between education and skills, labour productivity, and wages is captured by the equation W equals MPL, central to neoclassical labour economics. Assuming a standard Cobb-Douglas production function, taking the first order condition with respect to labour gives us the solution that firms hire more labour until the marginal product of labour is equal to the wage. Therefore, given the positive relationship between productivity and wages, one would expect a decline in wages and in educational skill attainment alongside the slowdown productivity. However, the opposite is true. Post-2009, the UK, France, and the US have all seen a shift of employment towards high-skilled workers. Moreover, the figure shows that wages in the UK have been increasing. As a result, education and skills cannot explain this productivity slowdown. Participation in the labour force involves a trade-off between consumption, which is financed through wages, and leisure, shown by the indifference curves and budget constraint. Rapid improvements of leisure technologies has shifted optimal consumption to enjoying more leisure and working less. For example, there's been an increase in time allocated towards playing video games among young men. This may have also decreased the job finding rate in the bathtub model of unemployment, as people put less time and effort into job searches. Hence, leisure technologies could be a candidate explanation for productivity slowdown. However, the same leisure technologies have also increased productivity. For instance, it has increased working time outside the office while at home, which was particularly important during the COVID-19 lockdown. Therefore, the net effect of these technologies on productivity is ambiguous.
In summation, we've clearly demonstrated how significant a role allocative efficiency, technology, and capital deepening play in the productivity slowdown, while other factors like compositions of labour force have a relatively modest role. And that concludes our exploration into why labour productivity is slowed down in the 5 advanced economies. Thank you for listening.